people hop in because so how would we summarize last week? Who wants to do a summary?
So
I can take my
there were
notes.
the three justices. I'm trying to remember. I got to pull up my notes. There were things that were so Glaucon talked about. There were these things that were good for their effect. There were things that were good. What was the other one?
Three types of goods: um, ones that are good in and of themselves, but appear not be good, or ones that only appear good but are not good for themselves, and ones that are both.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I got a bunch of frames here, right? So you have the egoic frame, the social frame, and the ideal frame, and then they had different ways, right? The good versus wrong, best versus worst, and good versus evil, right? And then there was this tendency to get harmony up on each level, and so there's a pattern that the text is following, and then there was also this thing about negative motivation for justice, financial motivation, and reputation. And I want to get into the reputation bit a little bit later because I had an insight about that. But yeah, so there's definitely working with trees, sets of tree. Um, there's also definitely a systematic approach. Um, And yeah, we touched a little bit on the religious at the end, which was really interesting. So I guess I want to take that into, well, what did it mean to me? So I did think over these things a bit, because I've been toying with these frames myself in different ways. Uh, so they feel quite natural to me. Um, But yeah, I guess I have to admit that I've been slacking again in the level of integration. I've been pretty occupied with other things. Although I do feel like my intention of last week did not get expressed as well as I wanted to, but it allowed me a different type of engagement. Like it did allow me to see things differently. And I guess I'm going to set my intention for this week. Yeah, I'm going to try and remind people of their intention and things back to the intention so that it actually becomes something that's alive and participating in uh, in the conversation instead of something that's just on the background. Um. So yeah, Danny, what is your assessment?
My assessment of I think one thing I picked up on this morning that was just triggered a thought was I think it's a second or third sentence. There's some foreshadowing about the theme of appearance versus being. When he says, Socrates, do you really wish to persuade us, or do you only want to seem to have persuaded us? Right? That kind of gets into this theme of the true lie. Um, so there's like my I've been there's been like in life this week there's been lots of lies, you know. So my mind has been there, and also it's kind of been on the topic of boundaries as well. Um, I've used some lessons that I've learned from the first three sessions already, like in business, to have conversations and some of the skills, especially when it comes to So I've kind of put some of the practice to knowledge to use, um, and I do recall this week many times I did remember that the intention of engaging with this book has really been changing over time, and I remember that I had a really big bunch of really interesting insights, but I don't remember what any of those things are because I'm exhausted. Um, but can confirm that. I've already gotten a whole lot of value out of this exercise, and just so far. Um, so as far as intention goes, I mean, there's problems in my life I'm working on solving. It's kind of hard to get away with them because they're sort of overwhelming and all consuming. But a lot of that is basically, I think, at the bottom of it is basically gaining gaining clarity on where and what I want to spend my limited time and attention on. And so like that's I'm increasingly becoming more clear about where my boundaries are, um, with respect to, okay, like like we were talking about, you can engage with some people, but at some point you have to say, okay, I'm gonna go take my time and energy and spend it over there instead. So I mean, I'm going through that process. I can't really directly connect it to the text, but that's kind of, I guess, what's going on in my head right now, and so that's going to inform how I interpret some of this text.
Um, yeah, I want to add something before I lose it. I did make a lot of connections between Christianity and how, in some ways, it's reacting to Plato. Like I'm starting to see that connection way more clearly. So that did pop out to me last week. Do you want to set an intention as well, Danny, and then give it over?
I think I'll have to think for a minute.
Okay, then
Yeah.
Ethan, you can go, and then we'll get back.
Um, yeah, my intention would just be to more about justice and how to participate in it more, how to and learn more about the world. Um, I don't know if I can have a more. I don't. Yeah, I don't think I can. Yeah, I guess that would be it.
Did you have any reflections this week on last what you learned?
Um, yeah. Well. I assume we're just gonna get into it, right? Just the whole thing of bringing agency down from the gods down to the persons, the humans. That's a big thing. So um, it puts a lot on the. It's really weird what he's doing. It really, like, human beings are different. Like, what, it's just like he's totally changing things. He's flipping everything. The accountability lies on um, can't the human beings are responsible for justice, not gods. Um, which is really, it's revolutionary, I think. Because before, this is kind of getting into book 3, but it's there in book 2. Like, if you see gods doing things, the humans are going to be doing unjust things as well, and they have no control over it. They're doing what they're supposed to be, I guess, so to speak, because that's the gods that they worship. So, what baffles me is how on earth they're able to see that the gods are doing things that are unjust. That's what I don't get. I don't understand how they can make that observation.
Yeah, we can get into that later because that definitely deserves some talk. Jack?
For me, really, reflections on. I don't have a ton of reflections on last week. It was just really too much with my kids. But as far as book 2 is concerned, there's a tremendous amount of. I have a tremendous amount of interest in talking about again their perception of the gods, and also the idea that they speak of a one god, which is very interesting to me. Towards the end of the book 2, and they are looking at the concept, like Socrates is basically saying that God cannot. These arguments that God cannot do anything evil. I just think it's very interesting. As far as an intent is concerned, um, really my intent is to be more engaged today, engage more, and also to flesh out more of the concepts in my own mind, because I still feel as though I'm playing a lot of catch up with philosophical thinking in general.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I hope we all. Well, Danny needs to do his intention first, I guess.
I don't really have anything. I don't know what to say here, to be honest.
Stay awake. Stay awake.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I think the theme of the true lie is kind of, I just like to maybe gain a better understanding of that and understand how to integrate that idea a little bit, maybe. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll stick with that, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. So you could use that as like a way of filtering what we're talking about, right? Like a lens. Because when I was talking to Skylar earlier today, he was saying, well, yeah, it's valuable to have someone looking in a specific way, right, in the community, because that allows for a different type of engagement, right? And then I think this also goes to what you were saying, Ethan, right? It's like how can people see that the gods are wrong, right? Like in some sense, you can also be that person for yourself, right? Like in some sense, you can also look at things differently than your assumption or your normal perspective. But that's hard, right? Like, and that requires immediate attention. And then if someone they can contribute from that perspective. And I actually think that was probably what the shaman was, right? Like the shaman was the entity within the community that was able to engage from a perspective that was alien to the people within the community, and therefore allowing them to transcend the reciprocally narrowed space that they're in.
It's really interesting because this is right
You're
around the
really
time.
low in sound.
What's that?
I'll have to put you louder. But...
I can speak into this thing a little. So I think right around this time, I see we're kind of speculating, I guess, kind of looking at the history. But one thing we do know, I think, is that this is right around the time that they were really embracing democracy in Athens.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that has anything to do with this, but like they're bringing accountability onto the people. Like it's coming down, so like it's very democratic in the sense that everyone is their own agent. They don't have that shaman at the top anymore that's interpreting things, or I don't know. I don't know what you think about that, or if that's true or not, or if I'm just speculating. No.
Yeah, I mean, you get this very Spartan feel when they describe the Guardian, right? It's just very like, and Athens just lost the Peloponnesian War, right, to Sparta.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
to bring in Homer and all this stuff is kind of like an unorthodox perspective that Socrates is, getting into, right? So I kind of had some of those feelings, but I was hoping Adam would be here to shed some light on this. But I was really hoping Adam would be here for the God stuff, dude, and the history stuff. But
Dadgummit, Adam.
dang it, Adam. Yeah, miss that guy.
Let's see if he's playing games.
yeah. Let's call him
That's
in
the
here.
worst thing about
See if he's playing
Discord is
World of Tanks, man. Don't rat him out.
it'll tell you when someone's playing a video game. I think there was somebody that never mind. I'll bring that up later.
Oops.
So yeah, that goes to where I started reading, right? So what I wrote down is there's a negotiation with the gods, right? So effectively, and I'm gonna appease Mark a little bit here, right? Like there's this materialistic perspective, which basically says the injustice, right? Like take what you can get, right, and then pay off everybody or everything. That's not right, and that's effectively what governments are doing in some sense, right? It's like, oh, like we're doing this, and then it's going wrong here, and then we apply this patch here, right? We're paying off our sin, right? We're making a sacrifice to this whatever, so that it won't pursue us, right? And it's this endless patching. You can do that later when we start building out the society. That's somewhat of a necessary effect from the building out of society as well, at least in the method that they're using, right? And then they're also talking about God giving in to the will of man, right? So instead of man conforming to God, like you can bribe God, right? Like God is now an entity that you can ally with or something,
Yeah.
right? Um, so I guess that implies an equality in that relationship, right? And what Plato is trying to do is he's trying to take the transcendent out of time, right? Like it's not
Hmm.
in the mutable, and I think that's the move, right? And so what does that allow you, right? Like that allows you to have uniformity, I guess, right? Because before that there's polytheism, but also pluralism, right? And implicit in the pluralism is might make right makes right, right? Like these, there's a reason that he can't make the argument against it, right? Because like yeah, it is true uh, in that way of being.
Yeah, he's definitely uncovering the concept of monotheism or transcendent God or one true God. Something that is unchanging and is unmanipulatable because I don't know if we went over this last week or not, but if this God changes, that means that if it's a God that's purely just and purely good, what is it going to change into other than something that's less than good? So if you're putting good at the highest place and the source of goodness, it can't change. It's unchangeable. It's a constant. It regardless of time, it's going to be the same. Which reminded me actually of the burning bush that's unconsumed.
Yeah,
That's the first time the monotheistic God appears in um, the the Israelite tradition or in in the Bible. There's one thing that's unconsuming. It's unchanged.
I definitely picked up on, I don't know if it's a democratic thing, but the idea of, in this metaphor of the state for the individual, like it is the metaphor that they're putting together is very resistant to change, right? That's why they say, well, we have to filter the, we can't be telling the guardians about Uranus lied about something and then Cronus retaliated and did something bad. I guess we better bury that in silence. But
Uh,
there were many things like you know if it, when things are at their best, then yeah, I guess then they will be more resistant to affectations from the outside. They mention that about, here it is right here. And things which are at their best are also least liable to be altered or decomposed. For example, when healthiest and strongest, the human frame is least liable to be affected by meats and drinks, and the plant which is in the fullest vigor also suffers least from winds or the heat of the sun or any similar cause. And then they go on to say about the same thing about composite things like furniture, houses, garments, etc. When things are well made, when something is well made, then it's less affected by time and circumstance, and that kind of, they hinted at that in many places. I'm not really sure why that was such a prevalent theme, but I did notice it.
yeah, no, yeah, for sure. I remember he actually uses a metaphor of a bush, which was kind of weird. He said a bush that stands out and is more resistant to wind and heat. I thought was really peculiar.
Right. And so what are we doing? We're having a measure, right? some sort of a qualitative measure, but it's also inversely also the definition, right? So it's really
Yeah,
odd.
it's not really a measure. It's like the standard that you measure against.
We,
It's what,
I
how
don't
can
see
you
the
measure
difference
something
in
that's
which way.
immeasurable?
Well, yeah. Well, you have to set the frame, right? And he's pointing at that which sets the frame, which is a quality. And I actually have a note about this quantity thing, right? Because there's this semblance of, well, when we make the state, right? Like we need to account for these quantities, right? So there's a need, right? And then the need gets fulfilled, right? And then we can apply equality to the need, right? And now our potential space opens up, right? Like there's an optimization by putting quality on the quantity. And now we get diversification. So we go into this new space, right? So the first step is, well, we just get food effectively and things, place to sleep, right? And then we get specialization, right? And because we have specialization, now we have surplus, right? And now, because we have surplus, now we have a opportunity for a new entity, which is the trader or whatever, to arise, right? And now we're entering in a new equilibrium, right? And then when we've established a new equilibrium, we can get qualities again, right? Because now we've established this axis. Not, well, it's not steps, but in some sense it is steps, right? Because if you look at the Industrial Revolution or something, right, which was completely useless, effectively, right? And then it's not, and now we dig out that space in whatever how many years, right? And now there's a whole new economy, right? Like there's everything changed.
Man, well, you robot it out for a second. You said during the industrialization there wasn't something, and then there was. What was that? You said
Coal, right? Coal
coal.
was
Okay, got it.
useless, right? It was worthless, effectively, right? And then the steam engine came along, and now it had immense value and it gave immense agency, right? Like it expanded the agency of humans in tremendous ways.
So, like techne, is that? Are you saying technology as a, in general will have what effect? I guess.
Well,
Like as you increase the quantity of, like if you add a force multiplier to something, are you making? Are you saying something? Are you
well,
saying that?
you open up a space,
Yeah.
right? Like you open up a space of potential, and
Okay.
then that needs to be filled, right? And then the question is how does it get filled, right? So there's three stages in the city. So he starts off with this flat nature city, right, which is in need, right? Like it's on the edge. It's not flourishing, right? And then he goes to a city sufficiently providing for people, right? But now it doesn't have luxury, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
the luxurious city he called in fever or something or inflammation. Yeah.
Really?
Mm.
So the
Really?
minimalist city is in sound of health, and luxury is an inflammation.
Huh.
So it's a blowing up,
I
right?
didn't
And
notice that.
he links war back to that as well. So war is a consequence of the pursuit of luxury, which isn't always true, but sometimes it is.
Mm-hmm.
In the event that these things become economically necessary, it's saying war is an offshoot of that natural growth.
Yeah, that is his case. So yeah, do you guys want to pick something up from what I said, or because I?
Well, I'm connecting that idea of I remember they said that war is an art, and so I'm trying to connect that idea to what you guys were saying. I'm just thinking through it.
Right.
So they would
So
require a guardian class that would would specialize in warfare. Which brings us
Right.
into talking about the Guardian class.
Yeah, I want to do a bunch of things before that, but
Okay.
I have notes around that. So what? So they're going out from these gods, right? And then they're talking. What they're saying is, what can the quick-witted young man, right? So they're talking about without life experience effectively and no real proper grounding. How can that person decide whether to be a just person or an unjust person? Right. So I think they're reframing the problem into a maturization framing, right? Like so, when you mature, how can you have a healthy relationship to justice and injustice, which was really interesting, and also I think is really important and probably overlooked a lot.
You have
My Go ahead, Ethan.
I was just gonna ask if you have that marked down, which where he says that, so I could pull it up.
Just
It's like in the first part of chapter 2, still like
Okay,
it's like 30%
mind.
away in. Yeah. If you
20% in or something. Yeah. And so what is the place that this quick-witted man comes from, right? So what is his starting position, and from that perspective, what is the most obvious path to take, right? And then the way that they try to resolve that is by trying to establish what is profitable, right? So they're taking a somewhat economic, but not strictly economic framing, right? But it's still materialistic, right? And so what is the material gain that you can gain as a result of conforming to either justice or? And then this is where I got the insight why they're talking about status, right? Because what is status? Well, status is a material capturing of the spirit, right? It is the spirit as it is recognized by humans. That's what status is.
So on the idea of conforming, I have written my notes. I don't know how I thought this or where I got this from, but I have good education or conformity or cultivation of the individual produces good souls or muses that produces an orderly life, which is like harmony in the guardian class, which produces an orderly city. I think that maybe I think that's kind of how I had that written in my notes somewhere. That's kind of how I interpreted the flow of the metaphor to go. So like, right, a good education will be evidenced by someone who has the muses integrated properly, right? And then evidence of that is going to be, and then another thing I have here in my notes. Sophists thrive on ambiguity. Socrates moves from words to meanings. Sophists don't usually spend time defining things. Real knowledge is held together by a logos, or to say an account or a reason. So I was kind of trying to take. So I think by the time they get to the warfare, something's gone wrong when you need to go expand the state out to get luxury goods. Maybe I don't know. But anyway,
Yeah,
that's
well,
kind of how I
he
observed.
right, like he's like, yeah, like we don't want that, like so, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Hey, Mark.
Mark.
so to finish off this early bit, which was actually last week, it's not easy to be wicked, which is an interesting thing to say, right? So there's even a challenge in being the unjust man, um, and even yeah, provocation in some sense, right? Like, or an inspiration, and then this idea of secret societies that are necessary to reinforce well, not only your perspective but your place in society. And I was just thinking of modern times, right, where like, okay, we need all these institutions to maintain our capacity to do injustice, like that's literally what's happening.
Yeah, it's parasitical.
very interesting. The more things change, the more they stay the same, so to speak.
Yeah. And so now we go into the gods, or I go into the gods. So they make this claim again from the perspective of this youth, right? Like so, Mark is gonna love this. It's middle out thinking, right? So what do we know about the gods? The only accounts of the gods that we have are from the times. Like we don't have any direct experience or access to these gods, right? So there's a problem identified within the relationship and within the authority of the gods by their nature, in effect, right? And so no one has proved that a soul can harbor no worse evil than injustice or no greater good than justice, right? So now that is a escalation of the claim, right? Because now he's putting it in the extremes, right? So he took the extreme cases as examples, but now he's having it as a test as well, right? Like okay, like there's no greater good than being just. And then they go for lest for fear lest by wronging others that he should open his doors to the worst of all evils. Right? So there's this idea that doing the wrong thing will corrupt you or whatever, right? And that again, so we're not doing the right thing out of the rightness of it. It's about the fear of not getting corrupted, which also took me back to the Bible, right? Like the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. So they seem to follow the same path with the fear argumentation, which I don't like.
So,
But yeah,
so Manuel, when they're talking about the gods, that's the same argument that the later philosophers would make for everything, right? The no direct access argument, right? We don't have direct access to reality, to the world, but you see that argument here, and we don't have direct access to the gods. Not we don't have direct access to reality.
yeah, I would equivocate those two, but yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I wonder if well, I wonder if one's derived from the other directly, or if it's incorrect, or if it's only correct for certain. Like how did the Greeks divide it up, right? Because that's more what I'm interested in is how did they think about these things in the moment? Because from that, it sounds like they thought you had direct access to everything that wasn't, we'll say, uh, supernatural in this case, or extra natural,
Yeah,
however you want to frame it.
I really wish Adam was here, man. Dang it, Adam. But the way that because I don't know much about the Greek pantheons, but the way that I kind of thought of how this may be totally wrong, so I don't know. But I thought like Zeus is kind of like the executive center or like the executive function, kind of presiding over all the other gods, and the other gods are like warring for like you've got the god of war, you've got these other spirits, right? And like you've got all those things in you, and Zeus is kind of trying to be the one to sort of resolve when there's conflict between the two or something like that. I don't know if that's how they thought of it. Um,
Well, that's the impression that I got from the book,
yeah. Okay.
right? That he's the arbiter of justice,
Right.
effectively.
He's the arbiter of justice, but I think in the he's not trying to do that.
Yeah.
He only inserts himself when he has to, and when he oversteps his own boundaries, he gets punished by the other gods, right? Because it's the same problem that Peterson talks about with the chimps. It's like, hey, you can have a tyrannical chimp for a little while, but any one chimp is not going to win against two or three chimps that conspire against him, no matter how strong he is, right? And so there's always a tension. And look, the Greeks with the, it's obvious from most of the things that they say, and even the myths themselves, that the Greeks thought of the gods as having the same effective patterns and essences as humans, but having extraordinary skills, such weaknesses of humans, right? So there's no discernible difference between the behavior of Zeus and the behavior of the king of a city, right? And the lightning that Zeus has is like the ultimate power, which, I don't know if you've seen lightning strike near you, but yeah, sounds right to me.
Well,
Lightning's pretty powerful, right? But
Poseidon
that's a
is
king.
his older brother, though, right? So like Zeus is in some sense not really the most powerful, or like it's at least
Well,
ambiguous.
well, no, the power's not with the age. That's the thing. Like, it's not lineage. It's not age. It is a separate item. But and then it's interesting too, because once they agree to their roles, no matter how, like, Hades gets stuck with a bad deal by all accounts, once they agree to the roles, they stick to those roles, right? Which isn't to say there aren't transgressions. So you see, like, there's no clear bright lines even up there, if you want to think of it that way, right? So even in the idealization, exemplification, and clarification that this pantheon provides, there aren't bright lines. There's this constant negotiation back and forth between, you know uh, what Zeus wants and what Zeus should do as a husband, and and what Hades should be doing, and kidnapping girls that he shouldn't be kidnapping. It's a goddess, basically kidnapping a goddess, right? There's always this, and that's really the stories of the gods, near as I can tell, are deliberately used to exemplify the problems of man. Just again, it's modern science fiction, right? We're going to take away Star Trek. We're going to take away money. We're going to take away resources. We're going to mostly take away power generation, and then we're going to see what humans are like. Oh, and then nothing changed. Like, nothing, none of the qualities of humans that you actually care about have actually altered as a result of having, or not needing money, not needing to worry about food or type of food, or preference. Really, like, your preferences on Star Trek are kind of taken care of, especially the classic series, but because that's, that started the thing. And the gods for the Greeks are the same sort of trope, the same sort of mechanism in storytelling. It's just, the gods want for nothing, and they have ambrosia, and and a lot of the early myths, though, we're right there with them in a sense, which is not to say they're not ruling over the creatures. They still are, but there's the whole story with Prometheus, and it's like there's a tension even between the gods and the people, or the humans, or whatever, the proto-humans. I don't even know how they thought about that, because that gets into the early way versus the later way, when they structured the gods a little bit and separated them, because there's a time when we're together and now we're separate. There is a fallenness in the Greek mythos, so that's rather explicit. So I think that when you're dealing with the gods, you're very much dealing with this exemplification through a change of environment of the human condition, right? So, struggling with, well, why do humans agree to get married and then cheat on their wives? Why do humans agree, I'm going to stay down in hell, and then kidnap people? And why isn't the older brother the one with the most power, right? And it turns out he's not the most clever, basically, right? And he's also moody as
But
hell. That's the other problem with
yeah, that's
Poseidon.
Vampire. Yeah.
Nobody wants him in charge, right? They only side with Poseidon when Zeus gets too big for his britches, and I find that fascinating. It's like, Oh,
Yeah,
so they don't.
and he's in the sea, right? Which is also like chaos and stuff, right? Like so.
Oh yeah, right. So it doesn't go by age. It doesn't go right. They are struggling with all these same things through the projection up. We'll say.
So you missed the thing that I said, but like so they're in this materialist frame, and honor is the materialization or the material recognition of the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And so look at what are the gods, right? You could say that those are the ineffable side of the spirit or whatever, right? Um, and and so if you take the sacrifice deal interaction mentality with the gods, it's like well, it's like the modern I can be my best self by negotiating with myself or parts of myself and just become perfection within that, right? And then I can take an alignment to one aspect of my spirit, right? And I can focus on that, and then I become demigod, right? Like that's what the wisdom of Hypatia was kind of uh, set around.
So something I think I read this somewhere on the threes, but Glaucon is a courageous character. Eddie Mantis is a moderate character, and Socrates is kind of an embodiment of a wise wisdom. So in terms of like you have these three characters, and they're sort of talking justice out. So there's this intersection between moderation, wisdom, and courage. I think. I don't know. I don't know if there's anything there, but they're playing together, and then under
But
the
there's a
banner
third
of
character
justice.
coming up.
Okay.
So yeah, I think Socrates is supposed to stand outside it, um,
Is he?
but he
Okay.
yeah. Um,
So because like the reason I'm mentioning that is because some of the things that they say, like I don't remember who said it, are kind of preposterous, like about like censoring. Like Mark's got his free speech extremist shirt on there, like they talk about like, hey, well we gotta censor stuff, right? Like what kind of person would say that, would negotiate with the gods in that way? You know what I mean? I don't know exactly if that's if
What
there's
kind of
anything
well,
there or
person
not.
would say that with regarding the negotiating with the what do you mean?
Um, So okay, well, I mean, so let me on. There's a. I don't know if I can connect this very well, but there's nothing. The ignorance in the soul of him who is deceived may be called the true lie, for the lie in words is only a kind of imitation and shadowy image of a previous affectation of the soul, not pure unadulterated falsehood. So, I'm wondering if I'm. I'm trying to connect this. I don't know. I just noticed. I just noticed a three, and I don't know. I don't know if there's anything there. Um, so I don't know.
well, no, there's definitely something there,
But
right? Like,
basically, it's self deception. I'm wondering. Like if one of these characters is deceived, you know, is it ignorance? Like there's the boundary between ignorance and self deception too. That's another thing I was wondering too.
well,
Um,
actually, I was talking with Mark about this yesterday. Yeah, we had a big argument, right? And and the conclusion that I came to, right, is like if you're standing here, then it's clear, right? But there's this overlapping area in the middle where like it's nonsensical to talk about either deceiving yourself or what was the other thing? Um, but but
Yeah. Well,
because
were you acting out of ignorance, right? Or were you acting out of incompetence? And the problem is that one has a valid rebuke and the other doesn't. And so from an external perspective, and this is where we get messed up, like internally, you can put yourself in the state of the other person and then do the internally, I know, right, which is, I would call that invalid in all cases because you're not the other person. You can say, all right, well, from the fact that somebody failed, they're incompetent. But that may not be true, because let's suppose they were in a job that they never understood their role. And so if you were never trying to do that thing and you failed to do that thing, you're not necessarily incompetent. Like, you don't know. You don't know if the person's incompetent just because they didn't do something. Because if they're ignorant of what it was they were supposed to be doing, maybe they could have done it had only they pointed in the right direction. And so, like, and that's the same question, really. Like, where's the line of ignorance versus incompetence? Where's the line of understanding what you're doing, trying to do it and failing, versus just not doing the thing for some other reason? Right, because it's not so clear cut. Just because you failed from the outside doesn't really tell you, because you don't know intent, and you also don't know. It's not just intent. I mean, we wrap a lot up in that. You also don't know what it was they were trying, and so they could be intending to do a good job and not understanding the job. Then it's not an intent issue; it's an aim issue, right? So you could have wrong aim, and then I'm looking at that going, well, I know exactly what you were trying to do, which I probably don't. Uh, and then say, aha, you must be incompetent, when that might not be true.
But you can always take a meta perspective, right? Because you can always take a meta perspective wherein the person is incompetent, because part of their aim should have been asking what they're supposed to be doing, and therefore, or you could go the other way, right? Like, it's like you can do a meta ignorance, and you can reframe it in a different way, and that's
That's why you can't use
irresolvable.
meta usefully ever. Yes, this is the
But you
problem
can you
of
can do that
invoking
for
meta.
yourself, right? Because you can say, well, I
Right.
should be the person that, when he's in a situation, is capable of finding a place to participate.
Well,
And
that's interesting that you say that, Manuel, because I've been playing around with the thesis that you, from the perspective of an individual, valid, um, the only valid abstraction is an abstraction of layer one, right? And that's very much what's in book two. Is we're going to abstract from the person to the city. We're going to do one layer of abstraction, right? And the gods is a similar move, right? It's one layer of abstraction away from materiality, we'll say, into the ethereal realm, if you will, right? Or at least into the non-material realm, however you want to frame it. And so, yeah, I think that if you're only going one layer of abstraction, and the type of abstraction matters, right? Because when you're abstracting to the gods, you're abstracting individuals to individuals without a certain set of constraints. When you're abstracting to get justice, which is what we're doing, right? This is the problem of scale, right? Abstraction is a change in scale. So what Socrates does is we need to talk about cities. And now I have to wonder why anybody read politics into this book, because it's not there, which I find fascinating. There's no politics in this book. The stated purpose is to explore justice, not to create a perfect city. That's not you know, to create a just city, sure, but not to create a perfect city, not to create, say, the type of city you want to live in, right? Because they're only going after justice. And I would argue that that's a city that was only just is not the kind of city you want to live in. Justice isn't sufficiently high enough bar. So yeah, the idea of abstraction, you can always cast somebody in the mode wherever, in the play wherever, right? A third party, uh, one of the characters, or your personal perspective, but you can't do much else in terms of abstraction, because you get stuck in these loops.
yeah, so
If that
if
makes
if
sense.
I if I rephrase what you're saying, so I think what you want is, when you abstract, you want to have a grounded interface, right? And so
Yes. Right.
when he starts talking about luxury, uh, and saying that is a, what is the word that he's using again? Disease, inflammation of society. Uh, I think
Yes.
I think that's the thing that he's pointing at, right? Like, so
Yep.
there's a dysregulated connection to to its needs, right? Because luxury is actually not a need. So you're dysregulating the connection between reality and the last sentence that I was having about my notes was, we must make clear what good and harm come following justice and injustice does to its possessor, right? And so, in other words, does it allow you to be in alignment with reality, right?
Right.
Which in other words is, do you have a proper interface? Like, does it allow you to
Mhm.
have a proper interface with being? And I think
Right.
so that's the question. And like, you can even turn it around and frame justice in these terms. Things are just, or in order for things to be just, they need to have that quality.
Yeah, I like that. You're right. It is the grounding, right? So the abstraction is all about how far away you are from the grounding, right? I think that's good. That's good way to think about it. And then when you get too far away, so the statement of luxury is that you have all of your needs met and access to so much more that you're living way above your needs, like all the time. Like there's got to be something about time in luxury, right? Because you're not living in luxury if you go out to eat once a month, like that. Like there it going out to eat may still be a luxury. Fair enough. Like I think probably always going to a restaurant is a luxury, even if it's a fast food joint. Um, because you're not close enough to your food in some sense, right? You're not close enough to the difficulty of food, even if you're buying your food and creating it yourself. That's way more involvement with food than, there's the old joke about why do we need farms? I get my meat from the supermarket. It's like, yeah, okay. But also, but imagine now you're not even at the supermarket. Like Uber is bringing you your meal. You don't even have to leave to go to McDonald's, get McDonald's delivered, right? When you're living in that all the time, you're so disconnected and ungrounded from my food comes from ranches and farms and all these places, and then I have to compile that food into a recipe and and interesting. What else are you away from? I would argue you're away from art, because cooking,
Hmm.
like any other skill, there's an artistic aspect to it. And so when you get that far out in abstraction, it's a problem. And I think that's, the modern problem. We get too far away from the original intent and the original boundaries, which interestingly was the topic of my live stream last night. Then you lose the ability to orient in the world, and things spin out of control eventually, right? It's probably not quick. I think that's the problem. Like the computer industry is collapsing and taking a long time to do it, but it's so far away from, nobody really understands how anything works anymore, or the purpose of versions, or why it's important to compile code and not try to run everything bytecode interpreted, and crazy things like that, right? That things are just breaking down. I think it's the same with the government. The government no longer understands its role, right? And so it's sort of breaking down and trying things that maybe it tried before it maybe should know it doesn't work, and this is all the problem of abstraction. You're so far away from the grounding, to your point, that everything just breaks down in terms of being able to enact enact the things in the world.
So I want to go back to the government thing sometime, but I want to take some of the notes, right? Because there's the notes on the text by the author, and it says Plato denies that society is unnatural, either as being the artificial outcome of an arbitrary compact or as thwarting the individual's natural instincts.
I'll leave early here in a couple minutes.
What? Can't leave early. That's illegal.
All right.
We're headed to San Francisco. We're gonna go to the symphony. So
Oh, nice,
Ooh,
dude.
Oh, wow, that's wonderful. That's
That
luxury.
that's cool, dude.
yes, it
I want to
is.
see pictures.
Okay, I'll take some
Enjoy.
pictures.
I want to come, dude.
We're going to Mahler 6. You can come. I
I
don't know if you'll make it in time though.
I don't know if I'm familiar with that piece. Listening to a lot of classical lately. You end up so far abstracted that there's bugs you can't fix because you don't know about them because you didn't write the code. Yes. It's exactly the problem we were talking about.
All right. Hopefully the memory leak thing is fixed. We're recording. Okay. Good.
Okay, so Plato denies that society is unnatural, either as being the artificial outcome of an arbitrary compact or as thwarting the individual's natural instincts. And then society is considered merely as an economic structure providing for the lowest needs healthy animal existence. And then he's intentionally separating the higher needs, right? Which is I guess right. So that's 3 layers again. So we're back in trees, right? So lowest needs, higher needs, which are still necessary in some sense, and then there's the luxury, which is also the setup that they have in Wisdom of Hypatia, I think, although a little bit different. But to go back, right, to the disconnectedness, right? So what are these levels of needs? Well, these are in some sense the amount of integration. In Hypatia, they use natural needs and unnatural needs. Well, whatever. It's the
Oh, it's necessary.
integration.
I mean, it's necessary. The
Yeah.
Epicureans, is that what you're?
Yeah. So what they're effectively talking about is your integratedness, right? Like how much of you is necessarily participating with these aspects, right? And then there's more voluntary nature in your participation the further you go away from the needs.
So are you mapping? So yeah, I don't even like the mapping here, right? It's sufficiency and necessity in Epicureanism.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah,
Necessary is
I don't
sufficient.
like it because like there's this shady boundary again, just like we had earlier, right? Like when like
Yeah, I
there's
mean, I
this
think
these 2 edges, right? Like luxury is obvious, right? Because like it's if you remove it, it doesn't matter, right? And then necessity is obvious because if you
right,
don't have it, you die. And then there's
right.
this space in between, which is also again uncategorizable. It's really there.
Right, but I think that is the problem, right? There's always these 3 things, and there's one thing in the middle that we never have access to, right? Which is like the question between competence and ignorance, right? Are you incompetent or are you just stupid? I don't know, right? And you don't have access to that, and then we confuse. We try to collapse that. Well, if somebody didn't do the right thing, then they're incompetent, even though you can't know that, right? Unless you're them. uh, and then maybe not even then, because like, we sometimes we don't know what we're up to. To Jordan Peterson's excellent point, we have no idea. So yeah, it's hard to disambiguate these things.
Does anybody have comments or like I want to have a moment to reflect on your intention, and your participation? Maybe.
Probably got to take off, guys. So,
Okay. See you, man.
See you, man.
Have a good
you
day.
guys. See you next week.
Later.
Luck.
I don't know if this is still comments or actual text, but I think this is my comment, right? So the argument that they're starting to have, and this goes to the letters, right? Like, but what's the move that Socrates makes in his argumentation is a move of humiliation, right? Like I don't really know, right? Like the letters are too far. I'm incapable, and I this other step in order to gain a semblance of relationship, right? And so then I got this thing of quality as a category transcending attribute. So that's maybe the way if you have similar qualities, we were talking about the fractals, right, or the self-similarity of the fractals and the ability to move within them, right? I think that's based upon qualities, right? Like the qualities are the means by which there's consistency. um,
Mm.
We were talking about fractals off before we started recording. Should we summarize what we were talking about
sure,
how
we can do
it's well I don't know if I can. It's about basically
that.
it's about intelligibility, right? I'm trying to remember what we were talking about.
Well, so I'm connecting it to logical and non-logical identity, and I don't
That's
like
right.
it, right? But there's this problem with logic, right? Because like, well, what is logic, right? Like, why is the similarity between a ball and a planet non-logical, but uh, the similarity between one and two is logical? Like that doesn't make sense, right? Like there's a qualitative distinction between those two or whatever, but there's no really good means to what is logical and what is not logical. So I never liked the non-logical thing, but the non-logical aspect is adjudicated, right? Effectively, it's adjudicated by equality, I think, and so that's where I went with that.
Can you
What
use the
frame
word?
of reference are you? Go ahead. Go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
Danny.
Oh, I was just gonna ask.
What
Could you?
frame?
I was gonna ask if you could substitute the word poetic for. I'm sorry, since we stumbled on each other, I forgot what word I was about to.
So poetic, right? Like so it's basically what a symbol is a better word that you can use, right? Like so a symbol. So I can say round, which is symbolizing the ball and the planet, right? So the roundness is like a quality that is common between the ball and the planet, and therefore they're similar, right? So within that I can put an equal sign between them, but the equal sign is only within that symbolic relationship.
Mhm.
Right.
And that's the challenge that I think what are the names? Glaucon and Erymanthus are putting to Socrates is, hey, justify justice for justice's sake, right? And it's like, well, it's kind of hard to do that,
Yes.
right? So
Yeah,
yeah,
well, that is, I think, that is the point. Is that, yeah? How do you resolve the framing problem? And I would say this is the problem of living now: is that the postmoderns have convinced everybody that framing doesn't exist or doesn't matter or all frames are equal, and then you can't use logic, reason, and rationality. Don't believe that or don't understand that, but that's very much Peterson's point. Nowadays, a lot of people make the point, but Peterson probably makes it the best, right? Especially when he's talking to Vervaeke or something. He says, like, no, it's all narrative, and narrative is poetic.
Very interesting. Manuel, what I was going to ask you with the genesis for this question is, it's not long ago I heard a quote from Elon Musk. He talked about learning. He talked about get to the trunks of things, right? Don't get hung up on the leaves and the branches. And what I see here is that it looks like, in terms of the philosophical discussions you gentlemen are having, I don't know that I have the trunk yet. So I'm
Well, you
finding it
have to
hard
go
to
to the roots, like you
Okay.
don't go to the trunk.
Okay. Valid. I think.
But we were talking about the connections, right? The interface. That's what the roots are.
Right. So to that point, I guess my question really was, what is that framework? Where are you getting the idea, or where is the benchmark that says that the relationship between one and two is logical, but the relationship between a sphere and a planet or a world is not logical?
Well, that's what science did, right? They wanted two categories. They wanted to say, well, this category is justifiable within the scientific framework, which is logical, and then there's this other stuff that people seem to uh, adopt, but I can't justify it. Like there's no scientific means of establishing that category, right? So the thing the thing that I was talking about, so you can fractal, a better way is to look at it as a tree, right? So a programming tree, right? How do you compare a part of the tree with another part of the tree, right? Like how can you say that this part of the tree is like that part of the tree? Like you need to have a different perspective, right? Like you need to have a different way of evaluating your data than the normal binary whatever evaluation that the programming is using.
Well, the binary. I think that the point, and to the point of the trunk, right? The point is, in order to use logic and reason and rationality, they require a frame. And the point of the republic is, oh, you want to take something out of context, like justice, connect it to nothing, and then have it, and then justify it. But you can't do that, right? And so the first move in book two is, well, when you, like what Socrates is doing in book one is he's showing the inconsistencies that arise when you try to talk about justice from the perspective of a single individual. I'm not saying you're not including other individuals. I'm saying your perspective is flat, right? You're in the world. You're saying from this person, if this happens to him, it is unjust, and if this happens, it is just. There's no formulations that you can use. This is the whole point of book one. There's no formulations, zero, that you can use that are consistent to make that work. Consistency for justice, you have to go one layer up, one abstraction up to the city. So we'll construct, we don't intend to live in, right? But just to highlight justice, that's the purpose of book two, is to say, well, why do we need a city and what are the qualities of the city? Oh, well, you need censorship because there's such a thing as forbidden knowledge because children, which I just find absolutely fascinating. Nobody mentions this about book two because it's right there. Oh, and by the way, the statement of Gnosticism, again, is right there. And so because you have these problems, you don't have those problems at the scale of a single individual, because when you're talking about a single individual, either you're the individual and you quote know everything about yourself, which is already a problem. It's already not true, right? And Socrates points that out too, right? Or you're trying to be a person that you're not, and you're pretending to have access to information that you don't have. So you can't do that. So we scale up. Now, when we scale up, all these other problems come in about forbidden knowledge and children, and right, because now we have to account for all the other things that aren't, say, a single individual. The fact that they're living with other individuals, that there are functions that have to be done so that everybody can live, right? And the fact that there are going to be imbalances and excesses as the result of that abstraction. And so the whole point is you're not going to find a pure, right, unconnected way of talking about justice. It's not possible. So let's get as close as we can without going too far, without going all the way up to the gods, right? What we're struggling with is, yeah, the gods don't resolve the justice problem either. And that's certainly true in the mythos. The gods are not just.
Right.
There's which is not to say they don't try to be just, or there's not elements of justice, right? Like Zeus cheats, he loses another kid. That happens a few times, right? Like, okay, I mean, is it just for his wife to take out a child or two? Yeah, there's a form of justice there. I don't know if I like it. I don't know how just it is, but it's not like it's at least an attempt at a rebalancing, if you will. And so I think that's the issue, is that the whole Socratic method is in essence all about how do you get to the trunk? Where exactly are you starting to axiomatically to make knowledge statements, to make epistemological statements? Where are you getting this from?
Well,
And that's the whole Socratic trick.
and the example that you had with the gods, right? Like what is happening? Well, like the authority or whatever, like there's a change, right? And now the scales are tipped, right? And now we need to reestablish that. And I think this is why they're going into we can't have the gods be fallible, right? Because they're they're in this eternal zigzagging, right? And as a consequence, we are also in an eternal zigzag. And like you could argue that that is unjust, right? Like so okay, so I'll just go on. hierarchy of things that are needed, right? And then they go into second order effects. That's effectively the way that these cities are built, right? And then this is where my insight was, like, so you establish a quantity, right? Like a fulfillment of quantity, and then new types of quality can arise, and then at a certain point that escalates into luxury, which is effectively reestablished a being too far from the source, or from being, and now I actually thought of that making things sacred actually fixes that problem. But that is a
That was a good insight. Yes. Yeah, you're
Did
too
they
far
mention
away
that?
from the things you depend on.
no. That's like I'm just
Okay.
reading my stuff, and I'm like, oh, like what
Okay.
is making things sacred, right? Like it's making them necessary. Like, it's like,
Huh.
yeah, like
It's
it needs to be
re-infusing
accounted
the
for.
yeah, it's re-infusing the connection with need, right? It's saying, well, maybe I don't need this physically, but I need it. I need it on that other ethereal realm or something, right? I need it in the in order to understand the forms because I'm surrounded in, and we'll say an exhaustive amount of materiality. All right, I just have Uber Eats coming to my house 24/7, and so I just have no understanding, and I think you can just pave over all ranch land with solar cells to fix some problem with electricity or something equally absurd. And that's how you get there. Get there with that disconnection and that lack of sacredness. And I would say it was actually a sort of common thing that the wealthy bad guys were going to church in a lot of literature. Not too long ago.
The
We'll say from
mafia.
the 70s, and oh yeah, yeah, exactly. The mafia are very, very Catholic, which is strange, right? You're like, wait, what? But they live in luxury, and they need to keep something sacred, and that trope is definitely in a lot of literature.
Yeah. So now we go back to the comments. So Socrates' problem is not to build a utopia in the air, but to discover the least changes which would radically cure the distempers of Athenians. And then he also says that a
Could you say
world
that one more time?
state.
Sorry, could you say that one more time?
So he's not trying to build utopia, right? So
Mm-hmm.
he's not saying, well, like the perfect society would be like this. That's not his project. But he is trying to deal with what is Athens doing wrong, right? So it's a more abstract and non-idealistic thing, right? And then the world state, right? Like this is what the Chinese continent was doing, right? Like they were the conquerors of the world, right? And then they could establish a world order, and then there would be no more war, right? And I think this is also what the Romans did in some sense, right? But that is not a consideration as a solution to the problem. Um, so that is some interesting context there.
So I don't know if you wanted to. I don't know if I wanted if it's appropriate to interrupt your flow, but they did mention like when you exceed the limit of necessity, that's how you then you get to the unlimited accumulation of wealth. But I don't know why they didn't I didn't pick up on any like temperance or moderation as like they didn't mention. Did they mention anything like that as a solution to that problem, or did they mention any solutions to that
Yes.
problem?
So prudent fear of poverty or war will keep them from begetting children beyond their means.
Okay.
So again, there's an appeal to fear, right?
Okay.
Like there's these citizens, and they're gonna act rationally, and therefore they're not gonna exceed their means, because then they know that they're gonna get into trouble, which is also not true, but whatever. Okay. Then, the minimalist is in sound health, luxury is in inflammation, and with this manner of life, physicians would be in much greater request. So he's tying the luxury to a need of more physicians, which I was Like, what do you guys think about that?
He was tying the need for
Well, he
luxuries
was
to
saying,
more
well,
physicians.
if we get gold and ivory and all that stuff, right, and arts and whatever, we need more physicians.
Yeah,
So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
of course.
Mm-hmm.
because we
Or
get
you need a
luxury
gym.
illnesses or what?
Well, because
Like I
we're
don't
creating new
understand.
Yeah,
diseases.
because you're not what we create, but you're not exercising. That's basically what like you got to remember what luxury meant, like relative to the average person. Like in the old days, when before they had cars and planes and stuff, right? Everybody was always walking everywhere all the time. And in luxury, people come to you, you don't go to them. And when you do go to them, you have four people carrying you on a like it's crazy, right? It's absolutely crazy. You're riding on a horse. You're not walking anymore, right? And that's why the early philosophers in ancient Greece, for example, that's what they did. They walked from city to city. And it's not that they would never accept a ride, but past a certain point, they wouldn't want to ride because, like, hey, I'm walking from city to city for a reason. And so they were healthier. Like it just, and they knew that in ancient Greece. So how we lost this information, I don't quite understand. But yeah, the more luxury you have, the more you're disconnected, the more you're ungrounded from nature, and the more you're ungrounded from nature, the sicker you are. Yep, that's 100% correlated. We've proven that about 6 billion times so far. I suspect we're not going to learn that lesson anytime soon. We'll probably continue to reprove it. Right? Crazy people end up going to the gym nowadays because they don't walk everywhere. They sit on a computer and they write some abstract code to solve a problem. And then it doesn't work because JavaScript never worked. And sorry, Danny, my bad.
No, I agree. So on the physician thing, yeah, like if you think about like modern, there's a lot of really weird words for that. It's become really niche. A lot of the in the modern, like say DSM in psychology, for example, becomes maybe increasingly disconnected from. But also the second thing is it's the a physician is to the individual as X is to the state, right? So I think it's also a metaphor because we're in this, right? So like now you have a state that gets bigger. We need police. We need maybe judges. We now need a band. We have all these new problems. We now have to wrap duct tape and band-aid around them, right? And they're like maybe increasingly nuanced. So I don't know if there's anything there.
Yeah,
Um,
I like that explanation way better actually. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. Like there's gonna be more things, but I would call that judges or something, right? Like that would make way more sense because there's more conflict that needs to be resolved. If you look at Exodus, for example, like I think you can imagine, right? Like with Moses trying to get this judicial system, right? There's this element where certain states of being together or whatever they just result in more laws and more sophisticated regulation in some sense. Um, so yeah, now we come to the Guardians, and I didn't finish reading that stuff before we started. So this is based upon the commentary. The Guardians are a spirited group, uh, and they're based on the spirits of anger and pugnacity in righteous indignation allied with honor uh, and competitive ambition. So that is the definition that they gave of the Guardians. Um, and then he goes on, and they are segregated uh, based upon the need of war that will create two classes. Uh, one is the masses, effectively, right? Those who deal with nature, right? And then like this extra class is in some sense dealing with luxury, uh, and first and foremost with the protection of the luxury, and to be able to fulfill that role, they need to be excellent, right? And so then, uh, yeah, he starts differentiating in qualities of man and qualities that are needed to establish things, and he's going to he's separating the philosopher from the guardians, but they're still part of the class. And the other part interesting is that he's ignoring the other class effectively. So he's basically establishing it as self-sufficient or like self-corrective or obvious. So we want to go into the Guardian a bit here.
Yeah, you said a lot. I'm thinking.
What else is there to say about the guard? I mean, it's just it's just a trope to exemplify the need for a class system.
Right, and also I guess the noblesse oblige, right? To
Yeah.
those
Well,
who
I
have
mean,
been given much, a lot shall be expected.
um, yeah, I don't know if I'd cut it that way. Probably cut it
But
the
they're
other way,
excellent,
actually.
right? So like, and and they're supposed to be excellent.
Yeah, but I don't know that that's given, and they're actually unable to participate in the way everybody else does. Right? It's another sort of sharp line you can draw easily. You can say, "Oh, you need a warrior class," because there are warrior things that have to be done, and because you have a warrior class, they have different needs, and therefore they need to be catered to in a special way. But right, and then of course the real point of that is that's true for a bunch of groups. Within, for example, you don't need to deliver food to the farmer. He already took care of his food needs, and so can't treat everybody equally because they're not equal, and they're not equal in every possible dimension, right? And so, at what point do you have an abstraction, which is guardians, right, where you've got a class of people that needs to be treated differently for the sake of protecting things larger than themselves, outside of themselves? Because it's easy to cry self-defense or whatever. So the defense of a city is obvious. The method of defense of a city is not, because you can't have the women and children throwing rocks untrained at the enemy and expect a good result, right? Which is why you need these other classes, right? You need these specially catered to group things. Does that sound accurate, Manuel?
Uh, yes, although that was taking care of the materialistic side, right? So you could also say that these children and women also need courage, right? So that that's a theme of a lot of anime that I'm watching, right? Where like the spirit that these people are embodying is really important. Like, cause like you can just, if you cut off the head of an army, like sometimes they turn away. Like that happens, right? Like if you get the general, they're like, yeah, what are we doing here? Like, but yeah, sometimes it doesn't matter, right? Like sometimes you cut up the head, and they're like, yeah, okay, now we're gonna double down. Like you just doomed yourself. And so it matters. What is the thing that is cohering the group of people, right? And then, well, we're gonna go back to the spiritual, right, and to the sacred, right? Like if something sacred is guiding them, then they're gonna be much more formidable.
Is that what
Um,
the reason you think that they are seeking not to tarnish the ideas of the gods? They suppress. This is the point of censorship in this particular regard.
uh, yeah, well, yeah, that's to cultivate right spirit. Yes, that is totally true. Establishing the necessity of, uh, I guess, having a sound mind, right? So, and this is one of the problems in modern life. Is like, okay, like you are gonna reference the things that you've experienced or seen, right? As a way to understand other things, right? So it's okay to see something crazy once, right? But if the crazy thing is normalized, right, like drag queen story hour or whatever, right? Like if you start normalizing that, then your adjudication is going to be shifted, right? Because now you're going to think that this thing which is not normal is part of normality, and so that is what the culture war is, right? Or like oh, like I'm gonna have this whatever campaign to make awareness of this, right? Like it's trying to make things normal in order to shift the behavior of a group of people, right? So they're all doing this principle, right? And then, well, I'm not saying that's not okay to do, right? Like, but like you have to have that connectedness, right? Like if it's not rooted in your relationship to reality, but if it's rooted in your ideal fantasy, right? Then that's not good. Like that disrupts the capacity of society to operate, right? And so that's that's the justification for the curation, right, of all of these materials, right? And I think they also say, well, so they started talking about like what is the perspective of a youngster that is going to participate in the society? Like, how are they going to make that judgment, right? And then they also think they say that these things are okay for a certain class of people to engage with, but we're not talking about that class of people, right? And that's what the censorship is about. And we censor stuff all the time, like that is happening.
Right.
We
So if
just
you were to put it into a modern context, it seems that nation states used to have the idea, and a lot of them still do, that positive propaganda for the state is a good thing simply for the national defense. And perhaps we've lost that, right? We don't do that as much anymore, right? When you look at for example, the perception of American history 50 years ago versus today, right? A lot of what we didn't get right was not heavily exposed, and a lot of that I think was like, hey, man, like, yeah, we made some mistakes, but we're not focusing on those because why? We part of it at least is like we don't want people thinking the country's rotten. Like, why do I want to go defend this? Why do I want to go to Vietnam to, do what the country allegedly? I don't have any faith in the country's ideals because I think they have a rotten history, right? Am I making sense here?
well, that's the way that they're trying to do that, but I don't think that's good, right? Like we're going to the moon, or we're gonna rebuild after the Second World War, right? Like that are good things. Like that are things that you can bind around, and you could call it propaganda, but I would say it's like an ideal, right? Like it's like, oh, like something has happened or can happen, and we need to rally the troops in order to make that happen.
Let's take, for example, the
Well, and
concept of manifest destiny, right? They're like, hey, we have a right to this, right? Because we are righteous innately, right? And we believe it.
I don't. Yeah, I don't. It's not how they thought about manifest destiny. I think this is the problem, right? The problem is I'm always having a problem trying to discern propaganda. Everybody can tell me what propaganda was. Nobody can tell me what propaganda is. Nobody. I don't think it's possible. I think propaganda is a hindsight bias thing that doesn't. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what is the utility of it, right? And if it's only to look back, then propaganda is just a statement that winners write history. That's all it is, right? Because in essence, you're deciding what propaganda is. So, like, it's not like the government isn't going to put out a message,
True.
right? And so, what you're doing is you're judging the message that was put out, no matter how it was derived.
Mm.
It's like, okay, but how's that discernible from anything else? Because it's
Right.
not like the government is hidden from you. It's not like these things can be hidden from you. Like the Ted Kaczynski writes a manifesto. Is that propaganda? Oh, I mean, I don't. I literally don't know. Like, I don't know how to parse that because a lot of what he says in his manifesto is not wrong. I would say it's also Heidegger, but whatever. It's also not new, right? There's nothing
Right.
new in Kaczynski's manifesto. Is it propaganda? Because well, it can't be propaganda because it's not said by a government. No, what are you talking about? The government is going to do things, and that's going to signal things. The government's going to message things, and that's going to and that's sort of part of the war on marketing. But marketing is just telling you about the stuff that's available. And I would say that's unavoidable, or people can't cooperate. Like, if you don't know I have eggs for sale, you can't buy eggs from me. So if I put a sign on my property advertising eggs, am I marketing? I mean, I would say I am. I just don't have any animosity towards marketing, right? If and this goes back to justice. Like, if Zeus cheats on his wife and she takes out one of his kids, it seems a little heavy-handed. Like, but is it unjust? Because she can't do nothing, right? There have to be consequences, and so good justice versus bad justice, good marketing versus bad marketing, right? Good action in the world. Like, I'm not seeing a difference at that point, and
So
so is there such a thing as propaganda? I don't. At some point,
So
Interesting.
I can tell you what happened yesterday in the Netherlands, right? So I'm listening to this well, press meeting, right? And so they're talking, and they come out, and then they say we're gonna increase the speed in which we're gonna implement these processes, right? And in the same thing, there's this one party who says we're gonna wait until the local governments have formed their own plans, and then we're gonna renegotiate. It's like that's not speeding up, right? So what they're doing is they recognize that there's a delay, and then they try to put in a message up front of something that is speeding up, and then they hope that people are stupid enough to stick with the speeding up aspect. But like, is that propaganda? Like, does it even matter what they say?
So let me relate this back to, like I said, if you guys familiar with the Gulf of Tonkin incident?
Mm-mm.
a little bit.
Tonkin was basically a friendly fire incident between two ships in a rainstorm off the coast of Vietnam in 1967, and it was reframed as a hostile act that was an escalation by the North Vietnamese. It was then utilized in Congress to authorize significant additional money to relate the war against North Vietnam. And so, fairly black and white guy. I work on that, by the way. But so to me, that is like, okay, propaganda would be intent. Like, we want to steer a particular direction. We want to achieve an outcome. And this is what we're saying to get it, right? Which is something that you could see, obviously, during the Cold War. A lot of this posturing in terms of public information went back and forth. That to me is, but again, am I living in subjectivity here?
Well, you
So
could look at it
at what?
differently. No, I want to reframe that, right? So it's like
Yeah, me
there's a
too.
spirit, right? There's a spirit. Like, there's all of these people, and they're like anxious about what's happening over there. And now there's this one spark, just like in the Second World War, right? Like, this guy gets killed, and like they start a world war over this guy getting killed. It's like, no, like they start a world war because that spirit is there, and like just like when there's this glass of salt, right, and it's super solved or whatever, right, and then it gets this one blip on the radar, right? And then everything crystallizes immediately around it, right?
Yep.
So that's the way that you should think about it, because if those spirits and these forces aren't already present, that propaganda is not going to have an effect.
Right. And you have to remember that reporting anything ever, talking about an event has a goal. And the question is, what is that goal? And so what you're arguing over is whether or not that goal should ever be put to use, in a positive fashion. You can do a much easier one, right? You can do the second Iraq War, and you can say the whole thing around the nuclear capability or perceived ability to have nuclear capability in the near future of Iraq, the so-called weapons of mass destruction, which is a very complicated issue, as I'm sure you know. It's not anything like what it seems. I have a video about that, by the way, on navigating patterns, where I go through the whole thing, right? But the and the argument that I make is that the Second Gulf War, was justified by so many other things that the fact that that's the spark they used to set it off, to Manuel's point, is irrelevant. It doesn't matter that they had to use, and look, and I make the argument in my video too, that you can say they knew, and I would say there's no way that Colin Powell and those guys could have known. I'm not saying they didn't. I'm saying they couldn't have known, and therefore they erred on the side of caution, with all the other evidence that, well, they're breaking treaties. They do have these other weapons, which are not nuclear, but are certainly in violation of A, the treaty, B, UN, and C, their harmlessness, right? They're actually have big weapons that are offensive instead of defensive. This is kind of a big deal. How are we going to deal with this? The strength, the fortitude to do anything about the fact that they've been violating the treaty for years, right? And pursuing nuclear weapons. The thing they were pursuing, almost certainly, by the way, is the dirty bomb with the yellow cake. Like, that definitely happened. There's so much documentation on that from 3 different countries, that definitely happened. Now, you can argue that they would always have failed, but that's kind of a stupid way to argue that. So is it propaganda to prop up something like that? Or was it sinking of the Maine, right? I mean, there's so many examples, right? Is it propaganda? Because you're just boosting, to Manuel's point, an already existing signal. There's already a spirit there. So if there's already a spirit, and all you're really doing is steering people in a direction, and it, conspiracy theory is somebody believing information without evidence. Like, you can't have evidence that ancient aliens built the pyramids. That's not an option that's available to you, right? And you can't have evidence that Colin Powell knew that they didn't have a nuclear plant up and running. You can't do that in science. Like, science can't prove a negative. It doesn't. It's not designed to. And so people get very wrapped up on that asymmetry. And so what is propaganda at that point? Is it just adding the extra salt? Is it, what is it, the supersaturation, or supersaturation justified? Because that's sort of my argument about the second Iraq War, is that I don't care how they got there. They needed to go there, and it needed to happen. And that's probably a controversial take, but it had to be done.
You can say, right?
Go ahead.
Oh, with Ukraine, right? Like, a lot of people were worried about false flag operations, right? And so, what is a false flag operation? Well, a false flag operation is basically saying, I need a public justification for the action that I'm going to take anyway.
Yes.
Since we're coming,
and like, if you don't care, right, which Putin didn't, then you don't need it. Like,
right.
And so if all these people are playing with these fantasy rules, and Putin says, but I'm not playing your game.
They were looking for the Poland 1939. Hey, they're committing atrocities, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I remember it was reported, like, oh, is this going to start happening? Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. Go ahead, Danny.
I was going to kind of change conversation topic slightly. Go ahead if you had something that was on that same track. Okay, well, I
Nope,
was going to
just
ask.
appreciate the big picture thought.
Since
Thanks.
we're coming up on 11, I wanted to ask if I could read this epic John F. Kennedy Moon section and ask, is this enchantment or propaganda? As someone infected with a Protestant work ethic, this really gets me going. But if you don't mind, I'd like to read this for its emotional valence because I love it. But we shall send to the moon 240,000 miles away a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body and then return it safely to Earth. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And then may ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why 35 years ago fly the Atlantic? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one that we are unwilling to postpone, and therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure that man has ever gone. So you want to speed up your process instead of saying we got to hold up on the process. Maybe we need a little bit more of that. I don't know, but is that propaganda? Is that enchantment? I don't know, but I like it.
It's our flavor of propaganda, right, Danny? If indeed we're going to call it that, whatever it is, it's positive in our book. It speaks to us. So whatever it is effective, in my opinion.
And it makes an us out of all of the members, we'll say citizens of the country. It builds it defines the us as the members of the citizens of the country paying taxes. Right, and then people would go, well, that's positive propaganda, not negative. And now you're back into the problem. It's like, well, just do away with propaganda instead and worry about the message relative to the spirit. Because the problem is, right now, we have a world where everyone's worried about the message. Racist. And somebody calls me racist. I just literally didn't hear that. It's like, it doesn't even register. To be honest, it never did. I was just like resistant to other people telling me about my attitude about certain people based on the color of their skin. In fact, a fascinating conversation about that where somebody had to ask me, hey, these meetings that you go to, what does everybody look like? And I had to think about it because I literally don't see what people physically look like. I mean, to a large degree, like not just skin color. Like if you have a limp, I probably won't even notice. I'll probably just talk to you because I just don't know the difference between people sometimes. It's like, yeah, we're all here together. Sounds good to me, right? And so that's the problem, is that it's about what you're paying attention to. And if you're paying attention to only outcome, and then you're assigning a value, well, that started a war. That must have been propaganda, right? And then you have the example like Danny gave. Now it's like, well, what's propaganda now, buddy? Because he just basically spun a whole story, which is an enchantment, I would argue. And it was great. Like so many good things came out of that spending that people have no idea. Like it's not just right. It's sort of in some ways what Kennedy did. And I'm from Boston. I'm actually a big John F. Kennedy admirer. So all the biases out on the table. In some ways, what he did was he steered the excess spending of the government away from the military industrial complex without losing the advantages of spending at that level. Right, because so many things come out of NASA in medicine and everything else. The only way things came out was either individual rich people, which is a terrible system because they're never as wealthy as a nation, or at least not never. I don't want to use the word modern. What do I want to say? In post-feudal times, they're never as wealthy as a nation, right? And before that, they were. Kings and nations were almost the same. They were very close. So he's taking that budget away from the military industrial complex and still getting the advantages of having a military industrial complex to some extent. And like that cannot be overappreciated, although it's been corrupted since then. But at least he started that ball rolling. And he did it through that particular piece of propagandistic enchantment, I think is a fair way to say it. But again, I don't like the term propaganda because I can't differentiate it from any other type of signaling in the world. And signaling is inevitable because you take an action in the world, people respond to that, even if you don't say anything.
So again, can you restate where your focus is then?
Focus is on the spirit versus the message. and again, the reason why that's important is because, yeah, if somebody calls you a Nazi or Hitler or something, that doesn't mean that that is within the spirit of what is happening. And that's why, like, oh, you don't care about the planet, and this is the big one for me, because I'm like, I literally have a lower carbon footprint than anybody talking about the planet, because the people with lower carbon footprint than me don't even have computers, and so we're not hearing from them. Their signal is zero, which is fine by me, like, respect, but I'm not giving up my computers. I'm dying with computers buried within me and online. That's how I'm going. And that's how I'm going out of this world. You're not taking these away. I'm keeping my electricity and my computers. Everything else, I don't need cars, whatever. But I need this. So understanding the spirit, which is part of your intuition, versus the signal, the message that's coming through, is important. And that's all that matters. And if you're focused on that, and you're focused on hopefully goodness, or the true, the good, and the beautiful, better yet, then that's all you need to orient the world, which is a very sad message for people who want to be smart and want a complicated and complex thing that only smart people can do, like Sam Harris, right? It's bad news for them. And it's good news for all the people that can't play that game, right? All the people that aren't smart enough to read and understand the Republic, which I'm now realizing is most of the people who've told me they've read it. I'm like, you sure? You kind of missed some important bits there, buddy. Yeah, it's strange to me. So focusing on those things without having to engage in this, in some sense, luxurious intellectual exploration, which I'm very grateful for and I love. And again, computers, right? We're all enabled by technology and things, but not necessary. Not necessary to live a good, true, and beautiful life.
And so, a couple of things I would add is, so you can look at things that justify a spirit that's already there, and then there's things that try to summon a new spirit, right? So, saying going to the moon or whatever, right? Like, that's not a spirit that exists. Like, that is actually saying we all should recognize this as a valid spirit and cooperate in it. And sometimes that works, right? And sometimes that fails. And like you can kind of like feel whether that is possible or not, right? Like you need to have the proper ground to set that spirit. But I had this experience on Discord where someone started talking to me about the abuse of Aboriginals and how horrible it was. And I said, like, why are you telling me this? And she said, well, you need to know it. I'm like, why do I need to know it? Well, because we need to spread awareness about this thing. It's like, why do we need to be aware of this thing? Well, so that it can change. Like, yeah, but like it's in Australia. Like, it's too far away. I'm never gonna do anything about it. Like, it has nothing to do with me. Like why do I need to know this? Uh, like I said, like I'd listen to you if you'd go there and you'd help them and you want to talk about that. Like, I'll talk about that. But like I don't need to have awareness of a thing that doesn't affect me and I can't affect it. Like, you want me to move over to Australia? Like, for real? And that's what people do all the time. Well, you need to have trans awareness this, you need to have this disability awareness that, because in the odd chance that you might actually face one of these persons, you have like ingested enough propaganda that you can react to them appropriately. It's like, well, that's never going to happen. Yeah, but like that's literally what the thinking behind it is, right? It's like that's literally the spirit that they're following. It's like, if you just know about it, then you're not good to do the wrong thing. It's like, no, like that ain't working that way.
That's a lot of food for thought, boys. I love
I
it.
hope so. That's the goal.
All right,
The train
so
is still moving faster than my brain. It's okay. It's good. It's good.
That's good. That's good.
So we are coming up on 11. I was curious about this idea of the noble lie. I don't know if we wanted to. I am okay to skip over that. I don't even have any thoughts on it. Um, so I don't know. But if we wanted to wind down,
Is that in chapter 2?
yeah.
Because I kind of didn't register it.
Let me see.
Yeah, I didn't register either. Do you know what section it's in,
Let's
Danny? Because
see.
it doesn't ring a
Looking
bell.
around.
Let's see here.
Well, I guess it's just the idea
Oh
of
no, you're right.
they made a distinction between a
Ideas.
true lie and a noble lie,
There it is.
right? I'm trying to remember. That jumped out at me. I'm not because it's a
I
good Arnold
thought that
Schwarzenegger movie, although it is True Lies.
it's all yeah, that's a great film.
Uh, well, I mean, this is getting into another theme. They talk about imitations. Um, it kind of gets back to the Greek pantheon thing. It's towards the end. It's towards the end. So maybe we can save it. Um, because I think it kind of maybe ties into chapter 3. Chapter 3's book 3 is awesome too. So I'm okay to wrap it up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think they brush the concept and
Hmm.
move on,
Yeah.
and then they cover it later. Is my suspicion. I haven't read ahead, so
Okay.
which I'm actually very happy that I'm not reading ahead because it's way more exciting this way when I read it at the last minute. So
Yeah, so the
yeah,
last
I
note,
don't.
I don't know if I did it. So Socrates is perplexed, and then he's
Mhm.
reflecting on what transpired within the conversation, right? So he's noticing that the things are manifesting outside of his control, his will, his intention, right? So when we're talking about Socrates as this great manipulator or whatever, right? Like here we're is he really manipulating or is he just going with what is?
Yeah, they're trying to say he's going with the spirit. That they're that's what he's known for is surfing the tides of this. And that's why people can't pin him down because he doesn't tend to make truth claims, and that's what everyone's basically angry with him about. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, they do touch on lies. They don't. I didn't see in the searchable version. I didn't see noble lie. I don't remember reading noble lie in the other translation. So they are talking about that concept though, Danny. So I think that's correct. Yeah, you lied to the soul above the things, right? And then there is that sense that Socrates, Plato makes it clear that Socrates is just going where things go and not trying to steer things.
So we want to wrap it up, Manuel.
Yeah, I think we're ready to wrap it up. Anybody any last thoughts or whatever? Um, yeah, so let's do a reflection. Maybe at the end of your reflection, set an intention for the week and how you're gonna integrate what you've reflected upon in your week. So yeah, and then we'll talk afterwards, I guess. So yeah, does anybody still want to point at something?
The only thing I want to point out, Manuel, is I heard a story yesterday from somebody, and he was saying when he went to school, they watched a film on the one of the Holocaust films, right? One of the prison camp, concentration camp survival films, and it's a bit of a longer story, which I can't do justice to. But the interesting thing to me is he said at the end, "I'm going to stop the film and I'm not going to turn the lights on right away." Uh, so that people didn't have to feel bad because basically everyone was in tears. And I thought about, he allowed you time to integrate. And I think that the integration and just not moving to the next thing immediately, stopping and taking that time, as we've discovered, I think, it obviously was in use, forever, and we've lost that. And so, yeah, we should make sure that we do this in all our events. We take time between events to integrate what happened, and maybe every event. Like maybe when you're done cooking, it's good to stop and reflect,
Well,
right?
in
And
university, we
however
had
you do it.
45-minute lessons and then 15-minute breaks, and I was always talking, right?
Mm. Yeah, no
So,
integration.
well, no, there was integration, right? Like it was reflection upon what happened. It was like that did occur naturally. And I was watching this crazy Toronto, whatever, Gnostic cesspool. But they also said, like, they had this mission statement at first, right? It's like, we're here to do this, to provide community, blah, blah, blah. And then they went into world peace and stuff. But like, they kind of did it, right? Like it's like the prayer at the start of anything. Like, we're gathered here together and we hope that God will provide us the ability to commune for this purpose, in fact, right? Like, that's no, I think that stuff is really important, right? And yeah, so it exists if you start looking for it, but then right, like the fact that you never recognized it also means that you did not participate in that properly, or maybe just by chance.
Right, right.
Yeah,
But
I agree. Like stuff just comes flooding in. 20, 30 seconds, of slowing down. It's crazy. It's legit.
yeah.